Okay, thank you, everyone. Welcome to today's fourth and last session. The title is The Influence of Mere Repetition and Social Identity, Relevance on Perceived Truth of False Claims by Li Chen Tai from Australian National University. Over to you.
Thank you so much for inviting me here and for the introduction. So what I will be presenting today will be quite preliminary research. So I am looking forward to the discussion. But yes, please excuse me if I'm making any errors or issues. All right. So, oops. All right. So misinformation. We have heard a lot of interesting studies and talked about misinformation today. But within the literature, there is sort of there are ongoing debates about is misinformation even a real threat? Are people generally good at distinguishing truth from falsehood? I think there are a couple of papers saying that yes, people are actually pretty good at that. So they use the control conditions of those misinformation intervention study and found that people actually generally, like 70%, are able to align their judgment of truth with the researchers. But there are also a bunch of studies saying that no, actually people are not good at doing so. So there's this sort of conflict and inconsistency within the literature. I'm going to be slightly controversial here, just for the sake of debate. I think that, at least to me, those are the wrong sort of questions to ask. We shouldn't be asking, is misinformation a real threat, or are people generally good at distinguishing truth from falsehood? What we should be really asking, in my opinion, is that why do people believe in certain types of information but not others? So the psychological processes that underlie what makes people make those truth judgments in the first place. I think that we need to understand that to actually then build our understanding on those other questions. So just look at a few examples here. Take a look at this. Do you think this is a true information? Is this true or false? I have no idea. So if you look at this, is this true or false? Now, I have no idea as well. But these are the sort of stimuli that are typically used in misinformation studies. So they present participants with very brief claims, and then they ask participants to judge whether this is true or false. A lot of the times, I think it comes down to, well, people can rely on those sort of metacognitive cues, or other than that, it's mostly sort of your prior knowledge. So is it really that much of a surprise that research participants align their sort of prior knowledge with researchers? So, so from that perspective, it's not that much of a surprise that even in the control groups, people are generally good at discerning within the context of those studies. But I think those potentially are too optimistic conclusions because out in the real world, we face all sorts of information. So yes, and we not magically or rationally possess and are able to evaluate all the relevant information that are not presented to us. So when we process information, there's this regression norm thing that says that we actually tend to assume that people generally communicate us with the relevant information. We tend to assume that it's true. There is also some research suggesting that to actually comprehend a statement, we must at least temporarily accept it as true. But obviously, suspension of this belief and actively assessing the veracity of information in an analytical method is possible, but that requires cognitive effort, and it is not always efficient. And the online information environment can make this even more difficult. So we draw on heuristic strategies like the metacognitive cues that I mentioned, processing fluency. So if a piece of information is easy to process, we tend to evaluate it more favorably. It has been shown to be impacted by many different factors, like the presence of an image or the fonts, and that could all impact processing fluency and in turn with how we evaluate a piece of information. So in the modern information environment, I think what's particularly concerning is the simple repetition of information, for instance, via social media. So repetition increases processing fluency, and people are more inclined to believe repeated information as true. So that's sort of the illusory truth effect that Tim talked about just now as well. And this has been shown to occur even for claims that are demonstrably false or inconsistent with one's prior beliefs. And this process can be further shaped by a range of social factors. We also tend to judge information as true when it comes from what we deem as trustworthy, or sources that we find attractive, powerful, or similar to ourselves. So there is a range of studies showing in-group favoritism. But there is a lack of research examining the simultaneous or interactive effects of their sort of cognitive processing fluency factors and the social factors. So I think it's important to try to study both and work towards an integrative model of why people believe certain types of information and judge others as misinformation. So I ran a series of experiments this year that tried to offer just a little bit of incremental progress on this front. So experiment 1 tested the effect of a salient identity and truth judgment. Experiment 2 tested the simultaneous effect of identity relevance and repetition. And the last experiment tried to further disentangle some of the effects in experiment 2. So I'll talk about experiment 1 first. Yes. I will get to that now. And so it's sort of slightly different across experiments. So in experiment 1, it's essentially sort of like a perspective-taking experiment. So we randomize participants to be, take on a home buyer identity. So think about the time that you're buying a house, asking the questions about home buyer identity. And then the purpose of that is to, at least for the identity salience group, to bring to mind, the sort of, the idea of home buying. And mixing in their identity as a home buyer. And then we got them to read a short story. And then at the end of the study, after a delay, we asked them to make a bunch of judgment on inference claims that are either identity relevant or irrelevant. So the examples are over here. So the story that we got them to read included details that are relevant to someone that is potentially considering to buy the house, or it could be that we had a really bad flood down here last year when the foundation of the house cracked. And then the DV where participants make their truth judgment on the inference claims would be something that depend on the story detail, but not explicitly mentioned in the story. And then we also included a lot of filler detail in the story that are not really relevant to buying a house at all. So it's school holiday and my mom is never home during the day. So what we wanted to do was, we were predicting differences for home buyer relevant claims because we manipulated home buyer identity salience. So we were not interested in accuracy per se because there are no right or wrong answer. But we wanted to see whether participants in the home buyer condition would be more likely to judge home buyer relevance inference claims as true because they better remember the details required for making those inferences. So I applied something called the drift diffusion model, which is in cognitive psychology, it's like a computational model that tries to decompose or model the response time data and the accuracy data, the judgment data concurrently. So what we found is that, let's look at the raw response proportion first. So yes, there is a difference between the home buyer and the control condition, such that participants in the home buyer condition tend to judge those inference claims, the home buyer relevant claims as more true. But there's also a difference in drift rate, which is typically interpreted at the speed of their information processing, or how they are able to sample the relevant memory from their representation that we presented them earlier. But there were no difference in boundary separation, which is how cautious they are in just clicking true or false. So this is preliminary evidence that salient identity that we really hit participants over the head with can potentially impact memory and subsequent truth judgment. But obviously there needs further replication. And then in study 2, the idea was to incorporate a repetition in the experiment. So test the illusory truth effect as well. So over here, what we did was randomly allocate participants to a salient US identity condition and a control condition. And in the salient US identity condition, now instead of home buyer, we tried to get participants to think about the US. So we only recruited US participants. And then we presented them with a randomized subset of the short claims that we have. So those claims about the country, and they are presented one by one. And then after a short delay, we presented them with all the short claims, so previously presented claims and novel claims. And we got them to assess their truth ratings for all the claims, both previously presented ones and novel ones, on a 6-point scale. Here are some examples. So I think one important aspect of this design is that the identity relevance of the claims was actually randomized. So each claim, basically X has 2,000 species of butterflies. And then for each participant, it can be randomly allocated to be about the US or randomly allocated to be about a different country. So what was presented to participants as identity relevant and irrelevant differ for each participant. And for identity relevant claims, they were always about the United States because we only had US participants. And then for the identity relevant claims, it's just any non-US G7 countries. So for instance, it could be about France, it could be about Germany, it could be about Japan. So it was a 2x2x2 design. So salient identity versus control, and then identity relevant claim versus irrelevant claim, and repeated versus new claims. So what we found is, so over here, the blue dots represent the truth rating of the repeated claims, and the red ones represent the truth ratings of the new claims. So there was an obvious illusory truth effect where repeated claims were judged as a lot more true than the new claims. So that's nothing new. That's sort of consistent with the processing fluency account that has been shown repeatedly in the literature. But what we also found was a main effect for identity relevance for the claim type. And this is surprising, or somewhat surprising, in the sense that the claims themselves, they are completely randomized. So they are, right? So they're not actually, so each participant get a different set of identity relevant and irrelevant claims. So we are controlling for content in a sense. What else? Right, so like I said, a clear explanation exists for the effect of repetition, and that's consistent with past research on processing fluency and the illusory truth effect. But there are also at least two accounts that we can use to explain the effect of claim type. So it may be that individuals more readily accept identity relevant claims as truth, but it may also be a result of the fact that the claims about the US appeared more frequently than claims about other countries. So in this experiment too, when we presented participants with 50% of US relevant claims and 50% of irrelevant claims. So the US claims actually appear a lot more frequent than claims about other countries, because the 50% of irrelevant claims claims from different G7 countries. So that could potentially be an issue, because the greater frequency of US claims could have also led to a frequency-induced greater processing, and then led to greater perception of truth, even though that wouldn't be driven by identity. All right, so that was what I tried to tease apart in experiment 3. So with experiment 3, I included two additional between subjects conditions where we systematically vary whether identity was relevant, as well as the proportion of country-specific claims presented to participants. So we had a frequency dominance only conditions. So in the frequency dominance only condition, the target claims were from a single identity irrelevant country, and the feelers were from multiple identity irrelevant countries. So there is still a difference in frequency across target claims and feeler claims, but identity wouldn't play a part here, because both claims would be irrelevant to participants' US identity. So this was a 3x2x2 design. Frequency dominance only versus identity relevance only versus frequency dominance plus identity relevance by 2 target claims versus filler, and 2 repeated versus new claims. And with the second between subject condition, that was what I mentioned, the identity relevance only condition. So with this condition, the target claims come from a single identity relevant country, which was the US, and the fillers come from a single identity irrelevant country, which was a random non-US G7 country. So there is no longer a difference in frequency between the target country and the filler country for this condition. And then the third between subject condition was essentially what I talked about in the previous experiment. So that's a combination of identity relevance and frequency dominance. So there was 50% of US claims and the 50% of filler claims, the identity relevant filler claims from a mix of countries. And what we found was, well, we essentially replicated the result of experiment 2 for the, can you see my mouse? Right. Yes, for the identity relevant and the identity relevance and frequency dominance condition. So we can again see a strong effect of repetition for all conditions, but the effect of the difference between target and filler was only positive for when identity was relevant. So when identity played a role, then participants judge the target claim as more true than the filler claim. And when we take out the identity component, so in the frequency dominance only condition, there's no longer such an effect. So what this shows is, well, it makes it really clear that what drives the identity relevance main effect in experiments really was the identity component rather than just mere frequency difference. I also did this exploratory state trace analysis, which is essentially a way to test whether more than one latent variable is needed to account for the data, assuming monotonic relationship between the latent variable and truth judgment on the target and failure claims. So obviously, well, just from the figure, we can see that there is, this doesn't look like a monotonic regression relationship. And when I try to fit a conjoined monotonic regression over here, it shows that that was, yeah, that it shows that we do need more than one latent variable to account for the data. This is not a unidimensional curve. And while we cannot say for certain that this is due to different processes, what I think is very consistent across the studies is that there is this different process that people use, a method cognitive field, and also social identity relevance as a different process that people use to make their truth judgment. And that's what this analysis tried to drive home. All right, so general discussion. Mere identity relevance and repetition can impact truth judgment. And the concerning part is that this could potentially be exploited by misinformation. And digital platforms and social media enable repeated exposure to claims on Twitter or X, and algorithms can personalize content, increasing identity relevant misinformation. So in terms of practical solutions, well, I don't have the solutions here, but I was thinking, can we apply the same principles to interventions? Should we build interdisciplinary collaborations to design interventions that resonates with people's identity? So use identity-aligned strategies to promote critical thinking instead of just trying to do the standard pre-banking and use this a standardized approach to apply to every audience. So I think, obviously, although more research is needed, I think such interventions might be more effective and be better remembered by participants and have more enduring effects, hopefully. And this is sort of beyond my presentation, but one thing that I've been thinking about that I would like to talk about is I want to study how people come to adopt different epistemologies in the first place. So we know that epistemology guide truth judgment and social identity guide truth judgment, but could it be that the different social identity are actually the precursors to adopting those different epistemologies? Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Comments.
Yeah, this is a great presentation, jam-packed with results, and I'm trying to get a sense of try to work through them. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about identity in this context.
Yeah.
Unless I missed something, in this case, it was kind of like identity with patient.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what with the first one is sort of a more arbitrary one and a more sort of personal identity rather than a social identity almost. So it's participants' personal identity, how much they identify with the home buyer. Whereas for the other two experiments is about how much they identify with the US. So we try to make salient their US identity by sort of asking them a bunch of questions about the US at the start of the experiment, pretending that we are just doing sort of this demographics questionnaire. To try to put US at the front of their mind. And what we consider as identity relevant in terms of the stimuli are then the claims that are randomly allocated to be referencing the United States, because we only recruited US participants.
Right, yeah, okay. Thank you. So what, I guess, what do you think is the mechanism that's driving the importance of identity in the effects that you're seeing? Yes. And the magnitude seems to be quite strong as well. Like, what do you think is going on there? I mean, that's a really interesting question. Originally, what I really were interested in was whether there might be some sort of interaction between the effect of repetition and the effect of identity. So what that would sort of indicate some sort of because part of the explanation for the illusory truth effect is that you have to encode the sort of prior information, and then that would you could activate semantic network during subsequent evaluation, and that would lead you to judge it as more processing, more fluent, and then judge it as more true. So if there is an interaction effect, it could be that people are encoding the identity relevant information more, and then that could lead to a larger illusory truth effect for
the identity relevant information. But we didn't really find that. What we found was just two main effects for one main effect for repetition and one main effect for identity relevance. So given that most of the claims that we use are not overly balanced, but still slightly skewed towards positive, I'm inclined to think that it might be some sort of in-group favoritism, sort of motivated reasoning process. So it's sort of neutral to positive claims. And if it is about my country, even though this is just, they're all fake, they're all just randomly allocated to be referencing my country, I judge it as more true because it makes sense to me. I think my country is good. Yeah.
I just love how you throw in some irrelevant information there. So there's a whole range of irrelevant information you can throw in. How would you like come up with what you should?
So within the context of experiment 2 and 3, what I consider irrelevance are essentially, filler are essentially claims that are not about the US. So I mean, I use a single. Oh my god, my laptop is a bit. Yeah. Anyway, so I use a single set of claims. They're all talking about how this country has that, and I operationalize irrelevant as just a claim talking about a country that doesn't concern me. So if I care about the US a lot, I might not. I would care less about what's happening in France or in Japan. Yeah.
Why do you think not 5 or 7? The market is 5 and the 7 version.
Yes, that is a good question. I think within the illusory truth literature, 6 and 7 point are the most common. I mean, the honest answer for me is that I just went with the most common. But this effect has been demonstrated on a range of dependent variables using binary scale as well, and also 6 point, 7 point, 11 point, and I think from 0 to 100 as well. So at least for the repetition effect, the Likert scale doesn't seem to make that big of a difference. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
I might have missed this. Yeah, so you're focusing on identity, relevance, and also like familiarity as the two kind of the thing.
Yes.
Correct?
Yep.
Yeah. So are they simply two of a number of other sort of psychological factors that or drivers of truth judgments? And I mean, if so, how come you've chosen those two out of a number of others? And is there some kind of connection between them that makes them that you want to have them in the same study, or does it also make sense to just do these? One study on social identity, one study on familiarity, or repetition.
No, absolutely. So, well, there are a lot of different processes that could be happening, but I thought these two processes are particularly relevant in today's sort of information environment.
Yeah.
Like social media, it gets lots of retweet on information that we may know, may or may not be true. And the idea behind testing both at the same time is to really test for that interaction that I was talking about just now.
Yeah.
Whether identity relevance would lead to a greater illusory truth effect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was wondering
Yep.
if you maybe related to what you found in the study and the epistemological explorations that you've had to like what we know about, say, Russian trolls, for example. Because often like this particular form of propaganda, like the tech, it's very artisanal, and the techniques that are used often relate to identity. So trolls will be. I don't even know if I like this term anymore, but like it works just as well. So 25-year-old journalism students who are working in the Internet Research Agency will come up with personas that say, as a an American mother, I believe that, you know, X, where X is some proposition, not like the number of butterflies or whatever, but, you know, something a little bit more pointed. I'm just really curious, what do you think that what you're finding here kind of relates to that sort of, that kind of propaganda style, you know, that technique, and is it possible that, you know, highly resourced state actors, just like let's just take Russia for example, because we talked about it a bit, kind of know this or have a sense about this, you know, given that there's 50 or 60 years of active measures going right back to the Soviet era, they have such a deep cultural understanding about what makes people tick, and I'm sure they don't have these findings, but to me, like, these findings are fascinating because unless I'm reading it incorrectly, it seems like there's a real crossover there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so too. I think and this is concerning, right? Because especially now with AI, I think even for information that are sort of initially identity irrelevant, we can easily use AI to tweak it, to, you know, personalize it to make it more identity relevant. And if those information are designed to cause harm or, you know, reduce social cohesion in democratic societies, then I think that could potentially be quite concerning.
And it doesn't. And if I'm reading what you're saying correctly, it almost doesn't even matter what the content is.
No, yes, because at least I mean, to the best of my knowledge, you know, the disclaimer, I think this is the first study that tried to control for content completely by randomizing the identity relevance.
Yeah.
So yes, at least within the context of this study, you know, content doesn't seem to matter at all. It's more about, you know, repetition and identity.
So in a way, it's not even about truth at all, right?
Yeah, so it's yes. It depends on which sort of level of analysis we are talking about. I think it could impact people's truth judgment, but whether it is, you know, that there's this underlying truth, then no, because technically all the claims that I presented to participants were false. So actually, I had this interesting, I guess, comment of the feedback from a participant is, you know, so obviously I have to give debrief afterwards, and then one of the participants telling me that, you know, it's so interesting that it turns out that everything was, you know, just random and false. Yeah.
I might just think of, I just want to learn a bit more on the method but also, did you just like those other ones you showed us earlier, only give them a true or false option? My question is, that don't know the right answer, like for when if you're not allowed to go and research and do the work. So for me, it's really important that people are able to go and do something if that's what they think is reasonable to do, rather than guessing.
So they had it was a 6-point scale, and I mean they had an option to, if I recruited participants are prolific using Qualtrics, so they do it, and they were able to look up the answers if they want to. But I had an open-ended question.
Like in the online.
Yes, it was online. I had an open-ended question at the end, asking participants, you know, whether they looked up the answers or whether they just, you know, what sort of strategy. What the specific question that I asked them was, you know, what sort of strategy or strategies do you use to make your judgment? So interestingly, it's not a lot of participants ended up looking up the answers. There was like a very small percentage of them. Most of them, yeah, just try to make it.
Tell them being encouraged to do that?
No, we didn't. So I think if I were to encourage them to look up the answers, then that would constitute a different condition. That would sort of be more like an intervention condition.
But then, they have to get the survey done, get the money, or that.
I mean, that is possible. Yeah, but that is when we process information in the real world. I mean, we unless we are really interested in the topic and unless we have this motivation to really get things right, let's say the incentives align that way, then I think most of the time when we are browsing Twitter or browsing headlines, we are also just, we're scrolling.
Yeah, so it's more in a sense of if you guess, if you're just making a gut feeling.
Yes, yep. Yeah, so it's less about whether participants are actively seeking information.
Yes, that goes back to what we discussed earlier in terms of the limitations of experiments, and maybe the method approach. Because in an experiment, you don't have the same, it's not the real world, right? Where you look at different characteristics. Well, sometimes we don't look at different characteristics, just share or believe in something or make a truth judgment. But sometimes we do try to look at different characteristics, whether that's how many followers that person has, the profile picture. But I mean, that's not what we look at in a controlled experiment. So
it's also a challenge, like how important is the tuning? And so it's like people are thoughtful, don't really care, yeah, you know, so it's challenging because so much is going on, but isn't it? And I wonder if you can ask follow-up questions to kind of get at that. I don't know, will the results be really different with higher stake questions?
I wouldn't expect the result for repetition to differ that much because that has been shown across various information type across even things like climate change that participants have strong priors on. But with respect to the effect of identity relevance, then I'm not too sure because I mean, if I were to make an educated guess, I think it might depend more on I think the balance of the information almost, rather than whether it's something that they care too much about. Because even just within this study, what I was hoping to achieve is that participants would care more about the identity relevant information more than the irrelevant one. But yeah, if some of the claims are more trivial, like rather than things about, let's say, a political situation. I'm basically just thinking out loud, actually. So I think if we move on to claims about politics, there is potentially a chance that the identity effect would actually be larger than what we have here. So this is, I guess, the bare minimum demonstration of identity effect. And if the identity is something that people hold more close to themselves, like a political identity, their partisan identity, Democrat versus Republican, then the effect could actually be larger than what we are trying to do here.
Also interesting because earlier we talked about what is true, right? And one approach that people take is not what scientists say is the truth, or I think give an example, physics or whatever, right? But also, what do the majority of people that I trust say about something, and that becomes then the truth, right? And then if you link that with this identity research, you can see then, maybe I'm more likely to assume that something is true because it comes from a certain identity, right? Which obviously is dangerous, but if I just repeat stuff and it comes from a certain group that I trust, then that's my truth. And I guess that's also what we were seeing politics and social or whatever it is, like where you have a group of people that become my identity, maybe not national identity, but ideological identity, but then has huge effects on my truth judgment. It's not that social learning, I think, but it's your kind of your view of the world is being shaped by people who are listening to the world. Yeah. Influence network. Yeah. And it might even, it will be interesting to see, whether it's the truly illusory, or is it where people mere exposure effect, whatever you call it, where it's repeatedly the same message, whether how that fits with identity, because I would assume that identity plays an even bigger role. So you tell the same thing over and over again, but don't belong to my identity, I might not even going to listen to you, right? Whereas if you are belonging to that political group that I'm following, then you say it over again, then I'm going to start to be the
So just to make sure I'm understanding it, right, are you talking about varying the source of the information that we repeat? Are you talking about varying the source of the information? Or
yes,
right? I think that
well, and also the message where I say something about identity.
right.
So I guess it's part of identity can come from the source because you have a certain identity that you affiliate with that source, or like the example that you get earlier was from, or like a mother or whatever. Like I can also assume through the message a certain identity, and that can also be ideological identity, right? Like as a Republican or as a Democrat for 5 years, I'm saying this and this. So I guess like, yes, the source, but it can also come through.
Right. Yes. No. I think that's very interesting. I think I actually expect some sort of difference between source and varying content. So I think there is some research showing that people actually neglect the source. So my battery is running out. Right. So there is some research showing that I guess it also depends on the duration of the delay. So actually, after a long delay, people tend to neglect source information and they just rely more on things like familiarity. Whereas if we actually incorporate the sort of identity component within the message itself, then I would thank you for the charger. Yeah. Then I would actually expect that identity effect to last longer than if we are just relying on source.
I really like the content agnostic questions that you raised. And part of the reason why is because you talk about at the beginning you were like, is this true or false to us, and everyone doesn't want to say so. Well, maybe if you're like me, I don't want to be the one that doesn't know, right? When maybe I think everyone else does. Maybe that common knowledge. I don't know who knows about butterflies, but so often on social media, for example, or even in political communication from the leagues like politicians, they'll make assertions that are just really hard to verify. Would take quite a lot of work, and so it's kind of interesting that you've kind of got an extreme version of that, I think in practice, so often that is the case, and so what it comes back to, like Jason was saying before, you see something happening, like Musk or whoever is putting out statistics about immigration, and crime, linear relationships and things like that, and no one can really fact check that. But as soon as you see, let's say it's Elon Musk, let's just say it's some fringe account on X, see that they got American flags in the bio, and it's there's no evaluation. It's almost like you see with this proposition that you can't witness, you can't go there, you can't take a photograph of it, you can't go look at the color of it. The truth is out there, but right now the truth is that it's true. It's I'll share it because I identify with it.
Yes, and absolutely. I think, and that even goes further down the chain as well. Even if we look up information, can we really be there? Can we really count the number of butterflies? It really comes down to who we trust, even if we are seeking additional information.
I don't want to be.
Maybe you should have some real world trust. I did a survey across 450,000 social media, how people read information about their elections and how they make decisions. So there was Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, and Malaysia. And we found that in the Philippines, people make the decision based on who their families are voting for on social media. So their families tell each other on social media what we're doing for, and that's pretty normal. In Malaysia, they go on social media to be policies and information elections, then they make individual decisions. In Indonesia, it was friends, but then friends of all before, and their family outside of social media. And in Thailand, it's a mixture, and it got really about trusting culture thing. You know, how like they are all going to social media to speak about election and speak about other candidates, but making a decision based on information from social media really comes down to like do they trust and how do they get that information, whether or not the decision is usual or like clan based or real, which I thought was so interesting because yeah, it's almost like identity, there's identity, but there's also that cultural component of it, which sometimes we cannot measure because we're looking at one country.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting, and I do wonder whether there are sort of cultural differences, let's say, between the United States and Southeast Asia and Australia. That would and I mean, and going back to the point of just we rely on trust even when we try to fact check. Like I'm not a climate scientist, and do we really know that this is gonna sound bad, but do we really know that climate change is happening? So I think that climate change is happening because I trust the scientists that say that climate change is happening. I do not have any ability to personally verify whether climate change is happening or not. I mean, I can look at photos or videos that show the effects of climate change, but how do I know those effects? Those videos are not fake. So this is sort of like an extreme example, but it really, I think what I'm trying to illustrate is that it really comes down to, regardless of whether it is true information or misinformation, it comes down to who we trust and what sort of framework we're using to judge those information as true or false. Which I think, what I'm trying to study right now is that then depends on our social identity.
Are satisfied with this presentation?
Oh yeah, I'm satisfied. I thought I did it in 20 minutes. Yeah. But no, like, if there's anything that's unclear, then let me know and I can try to clarify.
Yes, yeah. Really great. I can keep asking questions.
Yeah, I tried to tell you once.
Well, we've already. We can. I think maybe we can have more of a chat.
Yeah, sounds good.
Really
yeah.
Let's set it up for today. We'll see you tomorrow and take away dinner.